I don't know if you ever heard of Atmos mixing. Now, this is that new way of mixing that is starting to get a lot of attraction. Atmos has been around for quite a while when it comes to movie theaters. But we're recently starting to see a lot of music mixed in Atmos. So mixing music in Atmos is starting to be a thing. Now, I know that a lot of you might be confused when it comes to Atmos mixing. I know that I am, to be honest with you. I don't know nothing about mixing in Atmos. I don't have an Atmos mixing setup in my studio, and I'm not planning on doing so in the near future anyways. But I wanted to demystify and get a better understanding of what Atmos is all about when it comes to mixing music. So what I decided to do is to bring along my good friend Matt Boudreau from the Working Class Audio podcast. Matt already has a very nice Atmos setup in his home studio and already mixes music in Atmos. Matt is the best person I know that can explain what mixing music in Atmos is all about and make it in a very simple way. So, let's go and talk to Matt to understand what mixing music in Atmos is all about in a very simple way. Hey, Matt. How's it going,
Chris? Man? Pretty good. How are you?
Very, very good. Thank you. Thanks for being here today talking about Atmos. I know that this is something that a lot of people are asking questions about and are kind of confused about the whole process. And that's the same for me, so it's a good thing that you're on to explain to us what Atmos is all about, since you already have an Atmos setup at your studio.
And I'm still confused.
There you go. Awesome. So let me ask you this. In a nutshell, what is Atmos mixing?
Well, let's just compare it to previous versions of surround sound mixing, like 5.1. So in 5.1, as I understand it, because I never mixed in 5.1, that is what is known as a channel-based setup. So if you want, a particular instrument in a certain location, you have to assign it to a speaker, whether that's, the left, the center, the right, the rear left, the rear right. You couldn't just put it in any random spot. You had to choose very specifically where that goes. Atmos is an object-based system. So if you want the guitar in the left speaker, yes, you can put it there. However, with an object-based system, it allows you to say, let's say I want the guitar like right here as a listener, or right here, or right there. I can place it there with objects. It allows me the flexibility to, place things in like an XY grid anywhere in the room.
Okay. Without having to specify an output channel per se.
Correct.
Okay.
That's how I understand it. And then that's how it's been explained to me. And that's my experience with using it.
Now, the question is, when we talk about mixing in Atmos, now Atmos used to, it's been around for a while in theaters and like cinemas and stuff, and now it's starting to get more into the music side of things. So that's why we get more and more recording studios offering Atmos mixing services, like you do on your side. Now, the question is, if someone wants to set himself up with an Atmos setup in a home studio, how big of a room do you need to set up a good Atmos system?
I have a document here in front of me that I'm going to pull up.
Cool.
So for anybody, you can always go over to the Dolby website, professional.dolby.com, I believe is the link. But I'll send you the link, Chris, so you can put it in the video.
Yeah, I'm going to leave it down below in the description.
So they suggest a minimum layout height of approximately 8 feet, a minimum layout width of 10 feet, a minimum layout length of 11.5 feet. The recommended width is actually 18 feet. The height recommendation is actually 10 feet, which is the same as the minimum. And the recommended layout length is 21 feet as opposed to the minimum, which is 11 and a half. Yeah. So that's
okay. Wow.
That's according to Dolby. So straight
So
from them.
you can set yourself up in a relative small room if you want to.
Yeah, people are doing it in all kinds of rooms in terms of the size. You know, my room, this room is under 200 square feet. As you can see, it's not the biggest room in the world. And let's talk about these speakers. These are the PMC Result 6s. Really great speakers. I'm very happy with them. You can see that, you know, they have a bit of a deep cabinet. And because of that is the reason I chose not to use them in the entirety of the room, and instead chose for these, which are the PMC CI30s. These are my surrounds, and I'll show you all the location of those in a minute. But the reason these are great is because of their depth. This is only 4 inches. You can see how I mounted that there. And those are all the surrounds. So I'll sit here in my position where I mix. And so obviously you have your left, your center, your right. And then over here, we have our side left, spin around to the other side, side right, and then back again. Sorry, I hope not to make everyone dizzy, but there's the rear left or the back left, the back left or back right rather. And here we go to the top. There's the top left and the top right, or the top forward left and top forward right. And then there's the rear version of that, the top rear left and right. The remaining speaker in this bunch is the sub or the LFE. And in this case, I've chosen a Cali Audio WS12. Great sound, great build, great quality for the money. Really, really am happy I chose that. So that's your 7. The 7 are the left, center, right, the sides and the rears, right? So that's the 7. The 1 is the LFE, and the 4 in the 714 equation are the top speakers, right? Now, all those surround speakers are powered by this right here. It's an 8-channel Amphion power amp. Very simple, 8 in, 8 out. There's no DSP in there. The Grace M908. This is the brains of the whole operation. So this is the remote, and this allows me to have stereo setups, surround setups. I could have a number of setups, but this really does it for me. This is a fantastic piece of gear. As a matter of fact, there's its brain right there in the rack. Just, you know, 2 space. It looks deceivingly simple, but it's basically like almost like a computer. So what happens is this MacBook Pro has Dante Virtual Sound Card coming out over an Ethernet cable, which is right here. That goes down to the Ethernet box right down here, or yeah, to this router, I should say, or switch. I'm not an IT person, so I don't know if I'm giving you the right terminology. That then communicates directly to the Grace. So the Grace is the thing that communicates with the speakers. So you go computer to the Grace. Grace then talks to the speakers.
So I guess you would need quite an investment, like for someone who wants to set himself up an Atmos studio.
Yeah, you know, it is an investment, long story short, you know, because you have your speakers, you have to have what's called your B chain, which is essentially your monitor controller, the ability to turn all those speakers up and down together. And there's not that many monitor controllers out there that can do it. I went with the Grace M908. Some people go with the Avid Matrix and Dad Mom controller for their setup. JBL makes one, I think, called the Intonato. Apogee has a new thing with one of their interfaces. I can't remember what the model number is. So those are expensive in general. Where you can save money is in speaker choice.
Okay.
I went with PMC. I've always been a fan of PMC and
Sure.
decided that, if I was going to change, a couple speakers, I might as well change them all to PMC and go that route. However, there are, like, for example, Cali Audio makes great speakers.
Yeah, they do. I'm a big fan.
And at a great price. The engineer who wants to get into Atmos can save a great deal of money by choice of speakers. So
yeah, for sure.
That's where that decision can alter the financial outcome. Ideally, you want all the same brand. Some people might look at this and say, okay, well, your left, center, and right are different from your surrounds. But on PMC's recommendation, these two speakers were the closest. And when you hear them, you don't hear a huge difference between them. But, if you went with like a super tiny speaker from one company and a large speaker from another company,
yeah,
you're probably going to notice a little sonic change as you go between speakers.
And what about the connection side of things, from your DAW to your interface to the Atmos system? How does that work?
That's a great question. And that was like, kind of not a complication, but a something I had to get my head wrapped around. So for my setup, I mix in Pro Tools. Yeah. In the playback engine, that usually you would select an interface like your Apollo interface or something like that. In this case, you go to your playback engine, and for your interface, you select the Dolby Audio Bridge, which is a software interface that connects 128 channels of audio to the Dolby Renderer. Okay. The Dolby Renderer is a separate piece of software that helps facilitate everything. And from the Dolby Renderer, that's where you choose your monitor controller. So,
I see.
To get to my monitor controller, I'm connected from out of my old 2017 MacBook Pro. I'm connected via Dante. So I'll reiterate it. It's going to go Pro Tools over the Dolby Audio Bridge speaks to the Dolby Renderer. The Dolby Renderer connects over Dante to the Grace M908 controller.
Is it like possible to mix in Atmos using headphones?
It is possible. Most of the people that hear Atmos mixes are going to hear them on headphones. So that's something to take into consideration. Okay. However, I wouldn't necessarily recommend that's the only way you do it. It can be a major part of the process, but I highly recommend checking the mix on speakers to see what really happens, because headphones are what's available now in mass, but even now there's speaker systems for the consumer that they can listen to Atmos at home in their living room, and it's only going to grow. But the Dolby Renderer has a binaural, or headphone output only setup that you can use. So you could download the Dolby Renderer today, get I think it's like a 90-day trial. I could be wrong about the length of the trial, but there's a trial period so that you could get into it, figure out like how Pro Tools or your DAW, because it works with Logic and it also works with Nuendo and I believe Cubase as well. So you could get your DAW, connect it to the renderer, get your feet wet, figuring out how it works, and monitor it on headphones.
Okay, so someone could experiment with mixing on Atmos using headphones.
Yeah, totally.
Without having all the speakers, but just to get a grip, out of what Atmos is all about.
That's exactly what I did. Before my speakers came in, I got the renderer and started experimenting immediately and getting a sense of, this is how this works. This is how this connects.
So you need the renderer. You need a bunch of speakers. You need the monitor controller.
Yeah, the monitor controller.
Yours is from Grace.
Grace M908. Yeah.
Okay. And what else do we need apart from that?
Well, in the speakers, you need a minimum setup of what's called a 714 setup. That's the
Okay.
minimum. So 7 is the amount of speakers on this plane. The 1 is the sub, and the 4 are the ceiling speakers. So
Okay, I see.
7, 1, 4, or 4.
Listen, Matt, a question I have for you also is how does it work when it comes to the mixing process? When does Atmos come in play? Is it when we're done mixing our stereo mix or like while we're mixing our stereo mix? So what do you do on your side?
Usually people do it after the stereo mix is done. And I say
Okay.
usually because that is the thing that happens more often than not first, because like you'll mix a song, the band will sign off on it and say, yes, we like that. And it's from there, you can either take the multi-track and mix, change your playback engine and change all your settings for connection to, the Dolby render, et cetera. And you can mix right out of the multi-track, but some people find it easier to print stems.
Okay.
And a lot of stems. I'm not just, a drum stem and a bass stem, but like some people print the kick drum, the snare drum, independent of the drum kit. Some people like to print the toms, but essentially a series of stereo stems that have gone through your stereo bus and your whole chain.
Yeah.
Like when I'm working with other engineers, I tell them print through your stereo mix because you've created what I would call the DNA of the mix, the character, the sound of that mix. Run it through that stereo bus and give me all the stems and give me the following stems. So yeah, from a production standpoint, a timeline of it all, stereo mix, stem printing,
Hmm.
Atmos mix. However, you could start with the Atmos mix and do the stereo mix afterwards, I guess.
Okay.
We're still in the Wild West stages of this.
Yeah. So I guess so far would be, you do your stereo mix and then you work the Atmos version.
Yeah. So for example, if you and I were working together on a project, I would say, okay, do the mix, get yourself happy with the mix, and then give me a ton of stems. And then I'll do the Atmos version of that. Because what ideally I want to be in a position of is I don't want to have to be determining what compressor or what EQ we're going to use on something. I'm more interested in the placement in the field of how it's all going to work. Okay. Whereas you've spent the time coming up with as I said before, the DNA, the character of those tones. Now, if I have to do a little tweak here and there with an EQ, so be it. But generally, I want all the sounds to emanate from the original mixer.
And where is mastering come into play with all of this? Is there such a thing as Atmos mastering?
The short answer is yes, there is mastering for Dolby Atmos. However, there is a conversation in the mixing community right now that's very controversial. Some people feel strongly about it. Some people feel indifferent about it. Some people are like, whatever makes everybody happy. And that conversation is, do we really need to be mastering? Because we all, not all of us, but most of us have Dolby tuned rooms. So we have these tuned rooms. We're adhering to a specific level set by Dolby.
Okay.
And so therefore, people are feeling like, well, I have a tuned room and I'm adhering to these levels. Why do I need to involve a mastering engineer? Some of the artists are, questioning, well, do we really need to spend the extra money? It already sounds great. It's already at the levels that it needs to be. But it all depends on the comfort level of the engineer and the artist, really. There's an old standard of, you do a stereo mix and you go to your mastering engineer. I mean, I've done that for years.
Exactly,
So I think it's just, as I said before, it's the Wild West right now, and not everybody's settled in on where they're going to be at. I know many people who have done mixes and submitted them, and there's been no mastering, and it's worked out fine. So we'll have to see where that falls. But generally, people are going to do what they want to do. And if they don't want to go to mastering, they're not going to do it.
Exactly. Now, why should someone invest into an Atmos version of a mix?
Wow, that's a really good question.
Like today in 2022.
That's a great question. as time goes along, I think we're going to see more Atmos activity. And I think it's kind of comparable to the days of, you know, mono versus stereo. When stereo
Hmm.
came along, it was like, it was a novelty. It was, you know, people were panning things in crazy ways. I mean, that's, you know, some of us are chasing those early stereo mixes that, you know, we hear on Beatles records, et
Yeah.
cetera. And so, you know, if you're an artist and you want to stay competitive, I guess, you know, that would be an argument for doing an Atmos mix, because your catalog will be, you know, in available on Atmos. Because like I say, the consumer products are still, the offerings are there. There's not a lot of them, but I think that there's going to be more. And I've often said in my own podcast on Working Class Audio that my prediction is that the smart speaker companies, whether it's Sonos, Apple, Google, whoever it is, Amazon, there's going to come a time when I think that people are going to be able to order up like a 4 or 5 pack of smart speakers, set them anywhere you want in your room, have an app on your phone. It'll tune the speakers to the room, and then boom, your phone, not Amazon, sorry, Android phones and Apple phones can already generate Atmos content because
That's interesting.
the decoding is available in the phone.
Okay.
So if you can have your phone speak to a smart speaker and spread that mix around, and you can hear it outside of headphones, I think that that's going to be a game changer. So I think as an artist, you might want to ask, do you want to be, you know, playing catch up when it's finally, you know, here and everybody's consuming it, or do you want to be on the forefront of it and be ready?
Now, do streaming services offer Atmos playback?
Streaming services include Apple, of course, which is a big driver of the whole thing,
Okay.
Amazon, and Tidal.
So not yet for Spotify.
To the best of my knowledge, no.
Okay. Why did you decide to jump on the Atmos bandwagon?
Well, let me take you through a short story of why. So I used to go when I would, you know, go to trade shows, like I'd go hang out at the PMC booth every day at 5 o'clock during a trade show, you know, like during NAMM. It's 5 o'clock. Let's go hang out, meet up with friends, you know, plan the evening's activities. And they would always have an Atmos booth there. Not always, but for the last several years. And I would go in and I would listen, and, you know, they'd have like Rush, Tom Sawyer, and some other tunes mixed in Atmos. And I'd go in there and listen and be like, yeah, this is cool. Where this is going to go, I have no idea. And so, you know, I wasn't that interested. I was not dismissive, but I was like, yeah, whatever. It's not really on my radar. Then I started to see more and more friends, mixing friends, start to set up Atmos mix rooms. And I was like, huh, that's interesting. Why are so many people starting to set things up? I had heard about it for a number of years from my good friend Steve Genowick, who worked at Capitol and had been doing Atmos mixes.
Okay.
And I think when Apple made the announcement that they were going to get behind it, that was the straw that broke the camel's back for me. It was just like, okay, they're in, I'm in. Because if they're in, that means other people are going to follow them.
Yeah.
So that really was the thing that triggered the whole thing.
Yeah, and then it's to the market to decide, you know, the future of Atmos, you know, music for the consumer, you know. So,
and you know what? If it for some reason doesn't work out, I've already paid for everything. I didn't go into debt for it. And worst case, I've got a bunch of speakers to sell. Or we've discovered here in my studio that we can watch, you know, shows in Atmos.
No, you're right.
So I could always just keep all these speakers and watch movies in here, you know, when I'm not mixing in stereo.
That's awesome.
That's the worst case.
Funny enough, you know, it's I remember a few years ago at NAMM, Summer NAMM in Nashville. I was there with my wife, and we were invited. Were you there? I don't think you were there at that time, but we were invited with Lidge Lidshaw to Blackbird for an Atmos Dolby evening, where because back then they just installed an entire full Atmos system in Studio C at Blackbird. And man, that was impressive, I have to say. Listening to some songs like from Prince and Foo Fighters in Atmos, yeah, it was mind-blowing, to be honest. So, yeah, no doubt about that, that I totally get why you kind of got impressed with the whole thing, by just listening to some Atmos mixings at NAMM stuff. So
when you hear it on speakers, it is mind-blowing. And and you think, wow, I don't know how I could go back to stereo. And when you do go back to stereo, it sounds very flat. It's just like, oh, it's just there. It's not all around me. And there's going to be a lot of people out there who are naysayers who are like, oh, right, we've seen this before in quad and 5.1. This is different. And I'm with those naysayers to some degree. I've seen that come and go over the years and find minimal success. But this is a very different format, and it feels different. The environment's very different too. The commercial forces behind it are immense. Like I said, Amazon, Apple, Tidal, Dolby, of course, all the speaker manufacturers. A lot of people are going to want to sell some services and some products, and more power to them. If we can hear music and experience music in this way, I'm all for it.
Now, if someone watching this video is asking himself, okay, now if the market is going towards Atmos mixing and more artists are going to get their songs mixed in Atmos, does it mean that I need to invest into a whole Atmos setup in my home studio? So if that is the question you're asking, I'm going to say that the good news is that you don't. Because there's already people like Matt that invested a lot of money into a setup, into an Atmos setup. So I guess since you're already invested, Matt, you're already set up to get some gigs and offering your Atmos mixing services.
Yeah, in fact, I called a number of engineers once I got set up, and I just said, look, I don't know if you plan on getting into this. And many of them said, no. I don't have the money. It's not something that I want to do right now. And I would say, that's fine, but don't tell clients you can't do it, because we can partner up, and you could do the stereo mix. I'll do the Atmos mix. That way we take care of the client.
Yeah.
We get the work, and it doesn't go to somebody else, who we think is going to do a lesser job, or, that we don't think is a good match for the artist.
That's exactly my situation. I'm not planning on investing into a whole Atmos rig. So someone like you that I can have access to mix a stereo mix of mine in Atmos is awesome to have access to. So, and that could be the case for anyone watching. So you don't need to invest at this moment into a whole rig. You can simply use the service of a good Atmos mixing engineer like Matt Boudreau.
You could do that. Absolutely.
That's an option.
It's a great time to reach out to other people in your community who are doing Atmos. I would love to do everybody's Atmos mix, but there's just not enough, time in the day to do that. So find engineers in your community that are doing it, partner up with them, and learn all about it. And then at some point, if you decide that it's the thing for you, then by all means jump in, because it's a lot of fun. And if it makes sense for you, then you should check it out.
Cool stuff. Hey, thanks a lot, Matt. You answered a lot of questions that I had on my side, and I'm pretty sure that a lot of people had on theirs watching this video. So again, thank you for your time. And I'm going to leave all Matt's contact information if you want to submit a stereo mix to be mixed in Atmos. All the links are going to be listed down below. And don't forget that Matt also has an amazing podcast, the Working Class Audio Podcast. Again, I'm going to leave the link down below If you never listened to to a podcast of his, you have to listen to at least a couple, and you'll be hooked. I guarantee you. Matt, again, thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Great to talk with you, and glad that you are curious about the whole thing. Happy to always answer any questions you have.
Awesome. Thank you. There you go, my friend. I hope that was helpful. Again, all of Matt's links are down in the description below. Don't forget to share, like, and subscribe to the channel if you're not already. Until next time, take care and see you.